Thanks for joining this conversation. We're in Roma, Texas. Right behind us is the Rio Grande, and beyond that, of course, is Mexico. Fewer numbers than ever before coming across the border, and leading some to believe that our border problems are taken care of, that the border is secure. I'm sitting here today, though, with Sheriff Roy Boyd of Goliad County and Brent Smith, the county attorney in Kinney County. Gentlemen, the two of you are on the front lines, literally on the front lines of the border problem. The border crossing's gone down. Is the problem taken care of?
Absolutely not. And what you will find is that, yes, Border Patrol has done a fantastic job under the leadership of Mike Banks in securing the border and greatly reducing the number of people and product coming across into this country illegally. But the cartels and their operatives, their contractors or subcontractors, and the affiliate organizations that work with them have cemented their foothold across the United States of America in the last 4 years. And so the real challenge is not securing the border. That's the first phase and the easy part of the administration's task. It is ridding the country of the cartel scourge throughout the United States of America.
Brent Smith, like Sheriff Boyd, you came into office, you were elected in 2020, came in 2021, really as the problems were mounting. Both of you came to office same time Joe Biden did, not a reflection on either of you, of course. But you took the lead in Kinney County of saying, there's a real problem. This is a disaster in the making. Is the disaster continuing?
You know, as Sheriff Boyd was saying, the numbers have gone down. But just this morning, we had 2 arrests on local ranches for criminal trespass. So they've gone down. But when people talk about border security, it's really national security, what we're talking about in the long run. There's 2 facets to that. There's the border with the actual river, and then there's the homeland. Right. And right now, we're facing a tremendous task in front of us with the homeland and trying to secure that from the cartels. And the border's still going to take some work. We're still having numbers coming over. We have to deport more people coming in every day to even try to catch up. And, DHS is now estimating that almost 20 million people have come over. Right. That's a lot of people in this country illegally. And if you just take the very small percentage of that 20 million that are likely criminals, very small, you're still looking at thousands upon thousands of criminals in this country. And in Kinney County, when this first began, we saw the traffic coming. We tried to warn people saying, this is a big deal. It's coming. A lot of times Austin isn't the fastest to react. And so we went to other counties like Goliad. And, we kind of just formed a coalition of trying to get public awareness of this issue that's happening. And I think, Texans have had enough of this border crisis. We want to solve it, and we don't want it to happen again. So I'm hoping that we can talk about that today.
It feels like that as many of us who don't live, generally speaking, most people don't live on the border, right? And so as a result, we see the horrible pictures of these, large groups of people crossing the border. And that's kind of where the problem ends for most of us. But for law enforcement, that's really where the problem begins. So simply, even if you reduce to zero the folks coming across, there's this problem, as you know, of the 20 million who were already here illegally, that still have to be dealt with. And yet we seem to have a lot of cities, a lot of counties in Texas and around the country that are just they're taking the very easy political win. Well, the numbers are down, so we don't have to worry about it anymore. And in fact, that's not the case, is it?
Exactly. And that's one of the things that Brent and I have talked about is when Trump won the presidency, a lot of people just stopped, patted themselves on the back and said, we're good to go. We've won. But it's not that simple, because all of those illegal aliens that are in this country, and I believe that 20 million is actually a very conservative number compared to what Border Patrol has told me unofficially, what they believe came into this country. But all of those people now are beholden to the cartels. I mean, I keep a letter in my desk from a sex slave house that I raided in Rockport, Texas, that articulates that once you come into this country, it takes 8 to 13 years to buy your freedom from your smugglers. And so those individuals get put in indentured servitude. And as long as those people are here, the cartel has the logistical means that they need in order to conduct their businesses, whether that is their slave trade, whether it is moving drugs, whether it's moving money, and all the various things, stealing oil in West Texas in the Permian Basin, all the things the cartel is involved in. All those people in this country provide them with the logistical means necessary to continue with that business model. And we have to do something different. We're going to have to change our mindset, change our methodology, and we're going to have to get those people out of this country if we're going to rid ourselves of this problem.
And to balance off that, people thinking, well, President Trump is elected, the border secure. That's not correct. Now that Trump's elected, the work has now just begun. We now have to do the work to secure the border and secure the nation. And I believe too many folks in Texas and even in Austin, they have that wrong perception that we're done. Our job's done. No, it's just begun. And so we're going to have to roll up our sleeves and get to work. And I think that message is being lost to a lot of our legislators and sheriffs. They don't understand. They don't comprehend it.
So maybe this is an irrational fear that I have. I'll betray a little my own insecurities here, and maybe you two can reassure me that we have spent so much time the last 4, 5, 6 years talking about border security, about the problems of people, the invasion at the southern border, all correctly we're talking about, and yet. Now that it's ended, it feels like in some ways the crime being committed by cartels, by their associates, I worry that that's just going to become part of the background in ways. That it's just it's the same thing as the kid who gets his driver's license down the street and just doesn't stop at the stop sign. That becomes kind of the background noise of the neighborhood, is the kid, the 16-year-old who just rolls, and everyone kind of gets used to the 16-year-old who rolls through the intersection until he kills someone.
But you're absolutely right, but there's also another component to that. And so from what intelligence is telling us at this point in time is the cartels are aware of the strong stance that Trump is taking, and they fear what he will do as a result of some of the issues that he's brought up during the campaign. And so they're changing their business models. You have to look at the cartels like water. They flow through the path of the least resistance. So on the streets, what we've seen is the price of cocaine and the price of methamphetamine has gone up in the last month. The reason is the cartels have ordered a halt to the fentanyl production because they're afraid of killing too many Americans and having Trump come down upon them in Mexico. So they're adapting their business model based off who's in office. And their whole philosophy is, we've got to put up with this for 4 years. We'll adapt our business model for 4 years, and then we'll reassess when a new president comes in. And that's what's going on right now.
So, there's certainly a very correct sense in which the president, the governor, have begun talking about the cartels as terrorist organizations. But in many ways, when we think of the kind of the classic terrorist organization, Al Qaeda, ISIS, these are ideologically driven enterprises where they, their God is telling them to do something. Mm-hmm. With the cartels, while they may be terroristic in their activity, they really are businesses, illegal businesses, illicit businesses, doing illegal, illicit things. And so just simply calling them a terrorist isn't enough when it comes to dealing with them as a geopolitical force that you have to address.
Well, that terrorist designation actually brings with it some ramifications under federal law. And as an attorney, Brent can probably talk to you more about that than I can. But I know that in support of a terrorist organization, there are certain minimum sentencing guidelines that are enhanced. And so I know that is one of the aspects of it that the public probably doesn't understand. And to be quite frank with you, most law enforcement probably don't understand.
Well, and you pointed to something that's really important on cartels is, they are a terrorist organization, but they don't have a faith that they follow. Their God is money, the almighty dollar. And what makes them so dangerous is how other many Americans also worship a dollar. Their faith is the money to get rich. And so they can recruit easily. You don't have to have someone to join Islam to join them. It's just, do you want to make money? Mm-hmm. And that's why, in Kenny County, the amount of smugglers that we've arrested is off the charts, and they're from all over the nation, many from Houston, and they're all wanting to make the quick money, and that's the purpose of it. Do they want to? They don't care about border security, but their goal is money, and that a lot of Americans have that shared goal. They'll compromise their values just to make the money. So their recruitment, they don't have to recruit. All they have to do is provide the money, and so that's what makes them very dangerous.
I think the something that both of you have kind of hinted at already, that's sending little red flags flying in my poor little Aggie brain, is that is both of you made kind of variations around the statement of, and even law enforcement doesn't know, even law enforcement doesn't realize. It's certainly one thing for the casual taxpayer citizen resident in Amarillo or Plano or Beaumont to not fully understand the nuances of sentencing guidelines and some of these kind of obscure federal code. But when you say, but law enforcement doesn't understand, our prosecutors don't understand, that should maybe be a little. I think that should be terrifying to the taxpayer in Amarillo or Beaumont or Plano.
Well, that is a problem that we face, is that, crime has changed over the years, but law enforcement has not kept up. And so as crime changes and their methodology changes and the totality of what we're dealing with changes, we have to adapt our way of conducting business in order to stay ahead of that, or even just to keep up. And unfortunately, in many communities, what we find is law enforcement is not adapting as time goes by. They're going back to the same things they did in the 1980s, 1990s, and early 2000s. We have to change. If our adversary changes and we don't, then we are destined to lose. And to be quite honest with you, that's one of the issues that he and I talk about, is that we're not winning across the state, which is why, we may get into this in a little bit. It's one of the reasons we formed the task force we did, because our goal was to deny the cartels the ability to operate freely within the jurisdictions that were members of that task force, so that we could deny them the ability to generate enough revenue to have an acceptable profit margin. And it was successful to the point to where the cartel was telling their contractors, avoid these counties, because there's a greater chance of you getting apprehended and us losing our money. And so as time goes by, as law enforcement, we have to adapt. This new 287G program, which has a jail program, a warrant service program, and a task force model program, it's hard to get a lot of law enforcement agencies to understand that 287G is not just a jail program anymore. And so we have to get out of our old way of thinking, and we have to adapt to the times. And unfortunately, law enforcement is traditionally linear, and it's difficult to find people that are willing to adapt at that pace.
So I want to briefly maybe ask you, Mr. Smith, this say 287G. Okay, so I am as dumb as I'll look. Explain to me, if you can, as an attorney, what is, when you say 287G, what is that?
287G is a reference to a paragraph in the Immigration Nationality Act, which was codified to U.S. Code 1357. But everyone says 287G. All it is a statute that says DHS can delegate immigration enforcement authorities to state and local law enforcement as they see fit.
Right.
Basically.
Okay.
Now, it's kind of like at a restaurant. A restaurant owner has a certain menu, and depending on what the restaurant owner wants, that's what the menu says. So, Sheriff Boyd was talking about the 3 models that are currently in existence. Well, that could change tomorrow, and there could be 10 models if DHS really wanted to, or it could go back to 1 model. It's all dictated by DHS Secretary and the President at the time. Under Biden, the only ones available for states and local governments were the jail model. And that's what most law enforcement, it has, ingrained into their brain, is it's a jail model thing.
Right.
No, it's a lot more than that. And we've had conversations with DHS and about the task force model and, likely another model coming out in the future. So I think people need to get unstuck on thinking there's only 2 models, there's only 3 models. It's whatever DHS wants it to be. It's just the authority. 287G is just the statute that authorizes the delegation of those powers.
So then, in many ways, it's kind of the it's the will of the local sheriff,
Mhm.
of the local prosecutors, of the local police department. It's the willingness to participate in those model, to participate to the fullest extent possible is kind of the limiting factor, though.
Yeah.
So if a county, for example, to pick on our good sheriffs, right? If we've got a county that's doing nothing, that's kind of indicative of the fact that the county leadership wants to do nothing or they just know nothing. Is that fair?
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right, and you see that. I mean, Goliad County was the first county in the United States of America to be signed up and have the agreements executed for all three 287G models. But you have some agencies that aren't going to. As of last week, there were only 37 or 38 jurisdictions in the state of Texas that were 287G participants. Heck, we had 26 under Biden. So we haven't added that many. And last time I checked, there were only 6 pending. And so we're not getting that momentum that we need, because I don't believe that in law enforcement, we're grasping the totality of the enemy and the problem we face. We have to understand the other side in order to successfully mitigate it and keep our people safe. But unfortunately, that's just not happening.
I want to be real clear about one thing. The Trump administration has a border security plan and a goal they've set.
Mm-hmm.
He's limited to DHS and federal law enforcement authorities to do that. With just their numbers that you look at, their personnel numbers, there is no way for them to accomplish their goals without the help of state and local law enforcement. There's just no way. You can crunch the numbers any way you want. There's no way to do it. And DHS knows this. They've reached out to states trying to get help. And it's imperative that Texas steps up and aids the Trump administration to secure a border. Because, most people haven't thought far ahead, but we're going to have another open border president one day.
Right.
And if you look, we just got done with the border crisis. Well, quote unquote, we got done with the border crisis. What new tools do we have today that we can address that now with? SB 4 is tied up in courts. Other than that, we have nothing new to prevent this from happening again. I don't want Texans to go through what we just went through, all the deaths, the billions of dollars we've spent. What lessons have we learned? What new tools have been generated? What agencies? I think a border security agency that's state agency is desperately needed to address many of the issues that the sheriff just pointed out to. But we have nothing new. And so if it happened again tomorrow, we have to go through the exact same thing again. I'm a huge believer on learning from lessons in history. We just went through a huge crisis. Let's take some action to prevent that from happening again, because it will be at our doorstep again, and we need those tools in place.
I want to talk about the Sheriff. You said something, and you both mentioned this task force. This idea that you've got a lot of law enforcement. In fact, the way we treat criminal law generally is, in many ways, it's very parochial. It's very local. Our founding fathers wanted that very fierce power of the sword to be wielded as close to the people as possible, to prevent abuse by some distant tyrant. But yet we have this modern problem of these cartels that it's not, Michael and Brent going to go, knock over the bank in Goliad so the sheriff is standing there to stop us, right? These are cartels that are coordinating their efforts, checking weak points of intelligence networks, almost like nation states. But many ways we're still treating them like they are, Brent and Michael with a crazy plan to get rich quick at the local bank. That's very wrong thinking. We do need different tools like the task force, in lieu of anything else, at a minimum, like the task force, for the same kind of robust information sharing, right?
And you're absolutely right, because unfortunately in law enforcement, what often happens is you catch a drug dealer, you throw him in jail, everybody's happy, gets to take a picture with the dope, and then it's over. But nowadays, the model we've put together, we don't do that. We sit down, we debrief everybody, we conduct our investigation, we gather our intelligence, and we try to take that investigation as far as we can, as far up the chain as we can. And for us, that comes down generally to Hidalgo and Stark counties. Those are the two places where most of our crime meets right up against this river. And that's coming from across on the Mexican side. And so if we all just if we would all change our methodology and follow that model, you'd find yourself in large-scale investigations that take time and resources, but they pay dividends. And that's exactly what we've been doing. And not only that, but we work close with Border Patrol intelligence, with Border Patrol field operations. We also work close with Department of Homeland Security, HSI investigators, and we work concurrent cases. And we file on these folks, both in state and federal. But we have to change the way we look at crime. We can no longer pretend we're on an island and I only have to worry about what happens in Goliad, because what happens in the region impacts my community. And I have to comprehend that, and I have to adapt my ways of conducting business in order to meet those new challenges.
Mr. Smith, you were talking a moment ago about the about our approach. You're talking about the need for how we're going to be approaching things going forward. So what are the go forwards for us? We've got the legislature currently in session, various pieces of legislation that are, seeking, maybe not well, but at least are seeking to do the right thing. And in many cases, probably maybe seeking, but poorly to do well because they don't know better. They don't understand some of the nuances of this fight. What should normal people be saying to their state representative and their state senator, to the governor, to the lieutenant governor, about how the legislature can fix our laws to give more tools in this ongoing fight?
I hate to parrot Sheriff Boyd again, but he just brought up, the intelligence sharing is huge. Law enforcement agencies, sheriff departments, I've seen it. They operate in silos, usually on a county by county basis.
Right.
Sometimes within the same county, you have DPS and then you have the sheriff's office, and there's two silos within one county. And it's not only ineffective, it costs more. You don't share resources, you don't share intelligence. In the end of the day, you're spending more money for a worse product, so to speak. The task force that I was referring to would be a state operated law enforcement agency that is statewide. They share jurisdiction, they have resources, and they operate also within the sheriff's office of each county. I mean, I think there's been a lot of proposals on how that would operate and how it would work, but there's a lot of different theories out there. Some are good, some are bad, in my opinion. But at the end of the day, we have to have something. We have to have more tools in the tool chest to prevent this from occurring again. Being on the front lines and seeing the devastation that was wrought on landowners, people on the highways, the deaths that occur, we have got to do everything. We have a duty to do everything we can to prevent that from occurring again. And right now, I think the legislators I don't think they have an appetite for border security because they think, well, Trump's been elected, that's problems fixed next. And that's not the case. That's not the case at all. If I had to, grade our performance on doing this border crisis, it wouldn't be great. I mean, we did what we could at the time when the emergency was thrust on us. But now you have a chance to prevent it from happening again. Let's take some time and get people who know to come in and talk to the legislators to find out what does Texas need to go forward in the future, because it will happen again. Mark my words. And I don't want to have to go through that again. I don't think any Texan wants to go through that again.
Sheriff, there's what the legislature might do, could do. You have both pointed to there are tools that are available, imperfect. They're not. They require a few extra steps. The closest point of contact that most voters have into law enforcement is our county sheriff. Mm-hmm. Unlike the police chief who answers to the city council, as a sheriff, you gotta go kiss babies and shake hands, and just like anyone else running for office, which means people often feel a sense of relationship with their sheriff. So for someone who's watching, what should they say to their sheriff about participating? Starting from the assumption that the 253 other sheriffs in Texas want to do the right thing. That may or may not be true. Let's assume it is for a second. What are things that the voters and taxpayers, what kind of questions should they be asking their sheriff, and what kind of maybe advice as the employer in our republic should they be giving their sheriff about better participation in the border security problem?
The citizens need to be asking their law enforcement, are you participating in 287G? If so, how are you participating? But not only that, but what are you doing about the impacts in our community related to the border? And if your law enforcement tells you that you don't have any organized crime, they're not participating in 287G, then you probably need new law enforcement, because they probably don't understand what's going on, because there is not a community in the state of Texas that does not have somebody working on behalf of the cartel in it. Whether it's scouts, whether it's money laundering through businesses, there are various things going on, and they are happening in all of our communities, no matter where you're at. And if your law enforcement can't understand that, recognize it, and formulate a plan to deal with it, then your law enforcement representation has let time go by. It is past time for them to be in that office. You have to have proactive people in those positions that are going to take a stance and take action to safeguard our communities. But unfortunately, I see in a lot of instances, I have sheriffs tell me, oh, we don't have any of that in our county. And my thought is, obviously, you don't know what's going on in your county. So either that or it's beyond your comprehension. And that does happen. And so I think that as sheriffs, we need to ensure that we're educated. If we don't know about it, it's up to our constituents to hold us responsible and make sure that we're doing what we need to do to keep them safe and to make sure that we're up to date at all times. And so I think the public is going to have to be far better educated, and that's a messaging issue. I think the administration, just like with 287G, how there's a messaging issue that is causing law enforcement some issues, I think there's also a messaging issue about what is actually going on in totality, and it's not being taught in law enforcement classes.
Mr. Smith, obviously the sheriff is kind of the face of law enforcement anyways. The guy gets to wear the cool badge and the gun and the cars with the lights on top and everything. But ultimately the sheriff is just one player in the county. You've got the county judge, the county commissioners, a county attorney who serves in many cases, I know you do, as the legal advisor to the county. Same kind of question. When voters and taxpayers, they talk to the sheriff says, well, I like to do this, but the commissioner's court's the ones who got to allocate the money. They've got to sign the resolution. What kind of conversations should a taxpayer and a voter be having with their county attorney, with their county commissioner, their county judge?
And county government, like you said, there's many gears within it. Probably the most obvious is the sheriff. But each and every day, each of those gears makes certain decisions, whether they're big or small, based on their constituents. Every day I make decisions on prosecutions, on contracts. I think people have to be more engaged with their commissioner's court. Most people think that the commissioner's court is, it's a boring to go to, and most of the time probably is. They're ratifying contracts or paying the bills, but at the end of the day, they're basically like the Congress of the county. Right. They have the purse strings, and each person in the county that you elect means something. Local elections affect you more than statewide or federal. People don't realize it, but they do, and it matters. And so I would tell residents of Texas to look into your county attorney, your prosecutor, your judge, and go have a meeting with them. Go have a sit down. They're a lot more accessible than legislators in Austin or DC. Have a meeting, even if you don't have anything to talk about, go meet them to where you know their name and you can talk to them on a one-on-one basis. Because at the end of the day, they're the ones that are going to make decisions that affect you the most. And luckily in Kinney County, our commissioners and judges, we're all on the same team. But that's not the case in most counties. I've heard all kinds of drama from other commissioners in other counties. So you have to be engaged and plugged in, and you have to know what's going on in your county.
And a lot of, when you find that drama in a lot of counties, it feels like the counties with the highest drama between the sheriff and the county judge and the commissioners and the county attorney, that's often the counties where the citizens are least involved. Right, where the grown-ups are offering the least amount of oversight. And the more we as citizens can be engaged, the more likely we are to elect a team rather than elect a bunch of prima donnas.
Well, and part of that goes back to the misconception of what commissioners do. I would say a lot of commissioners, and not just commissioners, but a lot of the public think that a commissioner's job is to mow the ditches and fill the potholes.
Right.
Well, that's the easy part. They can hire anybody to go out and do that. It's making those difficult policy and budgetary decisions. That's where your commissioners really come in. And so that's where, as communities, we need to make sure that we elect commissioners who have the capacity to comprehend the totality of their duties.
Outstanding. Well, gentlemen, thank you so much for your time. What is one thing about securing the border that we haven't talked about yet that we should be?
I think it's going to be the need to bring the full spectrum of law enforcement together, whether that's local, state, federal, bring us all together under the umbrella of DHS or the border czar, and from there be able to go out and conduct a business that the administration has demanded DHS perform. Because the problem with the federal government is, on your average day, a federal law enforcement officer may encounter 10 people throughout their day that are outside of their circle of professionals. But one of my average deputies in a county of 7,000 people will contact between 20 and 100 people in a 12-hour shift. Those contacts are the opportunity to identify people and enforce the laws of the state of Texas, or possibly of the federal government. But until we actually leverage local, state, and federal all together in one unified effort, we're never going to achieve the results that we need to achieve in order to secure this country and safeguard the citizens of the United States of America.
I would say, Texas stands at a crossroads right now on what they want to do with border security. Whether they want to be proactive in achieving that under the Trump administration or be reactive. There's a huge difference in law enforcement on proactive versus reactive. And I know there's several bills in Austin right now talking about 287G participation. One thing that I want to make very clear is that in law enforcement, you can't have patchwork enforcement. You can't have some counties doing it and others don't. All that will do is create safe havens where it's not being enforced. You have to have uniform implementation of any law that you have. Any law enforcement has to be uniform in its implementation for it to be effective. Without that, you're wasting your time and you're wasting your money.
Well, see, and he's absolutely right. And one of the arguments being made about some of the bills going forward in the Texas legislature is whether you mandate 287G participation or you don't. But if you don't mandate it, like he said, you end up with a patchwork of law enforcement efforts, and you wind up with all these pockets that the cartel takes advantage of, because they are not foolish in the way they conduct business. And so we have to move forward. We got to come together, and we all have to go out, participate, and enforce that law. The American people elected President Trump to fulfill his campaign promises. It's our obligation as elected sheriffs to go out and assist the federal government with fulfilling those promises that the public has voted for.
Okay, I want to push a little bit on something that you both just said. 287G participation. I'm not a lawyer. Hang around with some lawyers every now and then, but participation sounds a whole lot like, we signed that. Billy in the back office, he's got that resolution sitting in his desk. We are fully participating.
That's compliance, not participation.
There you go.
And that's the difference.
And to me, that is kind of the concern I think some folks have about, some of the legislative pushes is they'll be, if you're not careful, you can allow a lot of counties to get away with compliance rather than actual participation. And we need participation.
And another problem I see with some of those bills is they start talking about the model program specifically. Those model programs can change tomorrow. They can be called totally something else. And then if you have legislation based on those names of those models, your law is useless.
Yeah.
So trying to specify that, and like Sheriff Boyd said, participation is participation. And I think state grants should be tied to participation, because what that does is, I don't want my tax dollars going to a sanctuary jurisdiction. Why should they receive state grant, which is state taxpayer dollars, going to places that aren't participating? They can use their own funds if they want to, but my tax dollars, I'd rather not go there. So that's my thoughts on it.
Well, gentlemen, Thank you for your time. Thank you for your, both of you serve counties that I'm not a resident of, but in many ways, I think I and a lot of folks around the state see Sheriff Boyd and Attorney Smith as our county attorney and our sheriff because of the work you guys and of your colleagues, like Benito Martinez and several others. You guys have done amazing work, even with without all the tools. So thank you so much for your efforts, and thanks for sitting down with us today.
Thank you for having us.
And thank you for joining this conversation.